Hey everyone, this is Pete, and I've got a secret to share with you, dear viewer. Adventure games aren't dead. They never have been. Even after Infocom disappeared, LucasArts stopped making anything other than Star Wars games, and Sierra did whatever the heck happened to them. They're alive and well, and they're thriving. Particularly delightful to me personally is the fact that text-based interactive fiction is thriving, and modern innovations have made it incredibly accessible to today's audiences, who may find themselves baffled were they to be faced with the completely freeform "What Now" prompt and a text parser. One of these innovations is the narrative scripting language Ink, developed by a studio called Inkle. And Inkle has made a number of games that demonstrate quite how good Ink is for scripting interactive narratives. The latest of these is called Expelled, and it's really rather good. Let's talk about it a bit more. Expelled, or to give it its full title, Expelled, an Overboard game, is a text-based adventure game with an attractive comic book style, excellent use of presumably public domain recordings of various classical and jazz tunes, and a frightening amount of player agency. And it achieves all this without you ever having to type a word. More on how that all works in a moment. In Expelled, the year is 1922, and you take on the role of Verity Amersham, a 16-year-old girl who is attending Miss Mulligatawny's School for Promising Girls, a seemingly prestigious private Christian boarding school based in an old nunnery. As the story opens, we learn that Verity has apparently been expelled for shoving the hockey team captain Louisa Hardcastle out of a 500-year-old stained glass window, thereby not only seriously injuring one of her peers, but also destroying one of the school's most valuable heirlooms. Trouble is, Verity is a bit of an unreliable narrator, to say the least. The game is framed as her explaining what happened to her father as he meets up with her in the village pub after the end of term, and the repeated playthroughs it's necessary to go through in order to uncover the full story is presented as Verity forgetting, deliberately omitting, or outright changing her story for one reason or another. By the time you roll credits, you'll doubtless have a very different understanding of the situation as when you started. Here's the interesting thing about Expelled. It actually takes some cues from Rogue-lites. By that I mean it has a structure that consists of relatively short runs through the entire thing. One turn around the story is about 30 to 45 minutes at most, sometimes even quicker, but with an element of persistence that allows you to achieve more, or at least different things with each playthrough. This is explained in-game as Verity writing down every piece of information she discovers in what she calls her filth book, and finding a means of reclaiming this valuable tome in each playthrough allows Verity to carry across knowledge from other playthroughs without having to repeat scenes or solve the same puzzles over and over again. The other thing Expelled makes very clear early on is that Verity is going to have to learn to stand up for herself if she wants to come out of this entire situation with her school career intact. This is initially presented as the school's formidable headmistress, the eponymous Miss Mulligatawny, aka the Owl, deliberately provoking Verity on the first expulsion we witness in the game, to such a degree that it's near impossible to avoid clicking the explicitly naughty options, which are initially highlighted in red and which add to a morality meter that reflects basically how much of a turbo bitch, complimentary, Verity has managed to become over the course of your multiple playthroughs. You can increase this meter quite easily by being spiteful, selfish, insulting and just plain mean. That does not initially appear to be a way to drop it back down again afterwards, short of deleting your save data completely and starting all over again, though there is a well hidden way to reset the meter without doing that. But Verity becoming nasty or evil isn't framed as a bad thing either. Rather, it's presented as a necessity for her to be able to get anywhere in society in 1922. Moreover, Verity is almost certainly going to find the patriarchal society of the real world quite a different sort of environment to the heavily matriarchal society within the school's walls, and Miss Mulligatawny is keen to impress this on Verity at the earliest opportunity. The net effect of building up the nastiness meter is that it unlocks new options for things that Verity can do. If she wants to prove her innocence, and perhaps even get someone else in trouble in her stead, she's going to have to get her hands dirty. She's going to have to lie, steal, cheat, manipulate people, sneak around, trespass, flout school rules, and repeatedly stand up to authority. And with every time around the story, she's going to have an easier time doing that. But as her confidence grows, her explanation of what happened becomes more complex, and you have more and more moving parts to keep track of if you want to see her survive until the end of term, and hopefully beyond. Expelled's gameplay is straightforward. Each playthrough, Verity awakens at 7:30 and goes to the school library after receiving a threatening note, supposedly from the eventual victim. Once at the actual library, the events of Verity's story depend on the things you've previously witnessed in other playthroughs and her overall nastiness level, but from there on you're in full control of her destiny. The game unfolds as a choice-based adventure game, but don't mistake this for a simplistic choose-your-own-adventure or linear visual novel with set routes. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those things, mind. While in each location, Verity has a variety of different actions she can take depending on the information she knows and her overall morality level. Each action she takes or conversation she has takes time, and at various fixed points in the school day she is supposed to attend events around the school, such as assembly in the morning, classes in the daytime, and the prize-giving ceremony, often the venue for her expulsion, in the afternoon. Along with this schedule, the game's various named characters all go about their business at set times too, though their exact routines may vary a bit according to what else is going on. Depending on how Verity handles the immediate aftermath of Louisa's defenestration incident, for example, other people may find the latter's unconscious body almost immediately, or it might be several hours before she's discovered. The school's formidable matron has a frightening ability to track Verity down wherever she is, which usually results in a visit to Miss Mulligatawny's office in the tower early in each run, but this doesn't always spell the end for Verity. In fact, a key part of being able to make some solid progress in the game is finding a way for Verity to stand up to Miss Mulligatawny and provide herself with, at the very least, a stay of execution, and hopefully an opportunity to exonerate herself. Aside from the visit to the Owl's office early in the day, which happens in pretty much every playthrough, you're mostly free to direct Verity around as you please. She doesn't really get into trouble for not attending or being late to her classes. Presumably the teachers feel that if she's being expelled anyway, it doesn't matter all that much. And thus, outside of any information she can glean during the classes themselves, her time is probably better spent elsewhere. And there are a lot of things to do and puzzles to solve around the place, many of which have multiple solutions. While a lot of things you can direct Verity to do might not immediately seem to be useful, one thing to always keep in mind is that little filth book. Once Verity knows something, it might come in handy in another different situation later. And indeed, if you want to solve all the game's mysteries, you'll need to gather as much information as possible. A throwaway comment or a seemingly useless item in one playthrough might turn out to be a critical piece of helpful information in another. Thankfully, an on-screen notification indicates anytime Verity has noted something new down in her filth book, so you can always tell when you've learned something important. One aspect some players might take issue with is the fact that you can't just open up the filth book and refer to it mid-game. When Verity finds it in each playthrough, it presents a random series of facts to you, and it also displays a random fact as a tooltip when you hover over it in the interface. But otherwise, you'll need to try and remember some of the more important seeming pieces of information, at least until you feel you've followed them up sufficiently to discover something else useful. While I can understand that some folks might find this a little frustrating, I feel this is a deliberate choice that means discovering new dialogue and action options in otherwise familiar situations always feels intriguing, surprising, and fun. While the game does offer a checklist of suggested tasks to perform next based on the things you've previously accomplished and the various conclusions to the narrative you see, it's best played in a more organic fashion, simply experimenting with different combinations of events, discoveries, and conversations to see where things end up. The worst that can happen is that Verity ends up expelled again, and we've established early on that this apparently might not have actually happened given her unreliable narration and our own part in creating that unreliable narration. The only wasted playthrough is one where you completely retrace your steps from a previous one. If you find even one piece of new information, you can make further progress in a subsequent run, if you bear that in mind. Sometimes this means making choices that are obviously bad or wrong, but that's why you go through the whole rigmarole with Miss Mulligatawny in your first playthrough. She's impressing on you the importance of stepping out of the goody two-shoes comfort zone that most games place us in, and highlighting how, if you want to make it through this whole experience, you're going to have to get creative, you're going to have to show little to no respect to the rules, and you're going to have to get nasty at times, including towards people who might initially appear to be untouchable. The heart of Expelled is a powerfully feminist message, an acknowledgement that women, particularly in the early 20th century, had to work extraordinarily hard if they wanted to be taken seriously, and not just by men, by other women too. The game argues that taking steps forward often involves openly and unashamedly having uncomfortable conversations and sometimes doing uncomfortable things without hesitation or guilt. Conforming to societal expectations and norms, such as being a quiet, demure little girl with good Christian values, may seem like the easy option, but where does that really get you long term? The world is a cruel, unforgiving and heartless place, and bad things often happen to supposedly good people. Better to equip yourself to be able to deal with that than let it potentially destroy your life somewhere down the road. Though you should perhaps also ask yourself when is a good time to stop too. To put it another way, as Verity hears, seemingly from Mother Mary herself after a desperate prayer session in the school chapel, "My son, bless him, he died so that you could do bad things when you needed to. So if you don't, he rather died in vain, didn't he? A little sin is sometimes how we get from today into tomorrow. It's like building work. You make a lot of mess and rubble, and you tidy it up again afterwards." Saying all that, one of the achievements suggests that it is indeed possible to win the game and remain perfect, so perhaps that's an overly cynical way of looking at things. Or perhaps that's just the ultimate example of being able to manipulate things to your own advantage. Come out on top while still making everyone think you're perfect. Either way, Expelled is a delightful narrative adventure well worth taking the time to explore, repeatedly. There are a lot of fascinating story threads to pick at, and even once you've beaten the game and rolled credits on it, doubtless there will still be a few of these threads you haven't followed through to their conclusions. Or perhaps you just haven't yet managed to successfully render 8 separate people unconscious in a single playthrough. It's a fascinating example of a thoroughly modern approach to text adventures and interactive fiction, beautifully presented with wonderfully stylish character and background art, and complemented brilliantly by its inspired choice of musical backings, taking in everything from the 1812 Overture and Flight of the Bumblebee to the St. Louis Blues, Swing Low Sweet Chariot, and Rhapsody in Blue. It cannot be understated how much atmosphere the background music adds to the Expelled experience, with each track not only lending a wonderful sense of authenticity to the game's setting, but also acting as the perfect accompaniment to the events unfolding before you. Expelled is an extraordinary game, and one that deserves to be celebrated. Inkle are some of the best in the biz when it comes to narrative-centric adventure games, and this is just another great reminder of that. Whether you harbour recurring fantasies of being a naughty 1920s schoolgirl, no judgment here, or you just enjoy sinking your teeth into a juicy mystery, I can highly recommend spending some time in the company of Verity Amersham and her peers at Miss Mulligatawny's. Now I'm off to go and see if I can figure out what's really going on with that horrible Fifi. Pass me the chloroform. And it just remains for me to say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.